Hi, everybody. I miss you guys a lot. And one of the things that I really miss the most is reading you a story. So I hope it's okay if I read you a story today. So let's get ready. Let's take 2 deep breaths. I can't do it with both hands because one of my hands is holding the camera. So you'll just see one of my hands. Here we go. One more time. Shake it out. Crisscross applesauce. Okay, here we go. I wanted to show you this picture that I showed you yesterday, but maybe you weren't able to see it so clearly. It's of a family having a Seder. And if you see on the table, there's a Seder plate and 3 matzahs underneath it. Now, not all Seder plates look the same, okay? But there's lots of stuff on the Seder plate that we're going to talk about another time. But I want you to look at 3 of the matzahs that are underneath that Seder plate. Matzah not only comes in a square shape, it also comes in a circle shape. And the circle-shaped matzah is called shmura matzah. I think you could also find it in a square, but a lot of people get it in circle. The reason it's called shmura matzah, can you say shmura? Shmura, it means to watch. That matzah is watched from the minute the wheat is growing that you make matzah into. It's growing in the ground till it's baked in the oven. It's watched. And it's watched by people, and they make the matzah. And then after it's all watched for a certain amount of time, it goes to the store and we can buy it. I'm going to read you a book all about a mouse who watches the matzah. And the book is called The Mouse and the Matzah Factory. The person who writes the book is called an author, and that person's name is Francine Medoff. And the person who draws the picture is called an illustrator, right? Nicole Inden Bosch. Okay, here we go. Oh, you know I have problems turning the pages, right, guys? I always have to lick my fingers, which is kind of gross, but that's the only way I could do it. Okay, here we go. Once there was a little mouse who lived in a wheat field in the country. One day, men came and built a fence around the wheat field. Every day, they watched over the growing wheat. They watered the field, pulled the weeds, and waited for the wheat to ripen, which means it's ready to get picked. The little mouse watched too. The little mouse wondered what was so special about this wheat. When the wheat was ripe, the men cut it down. They worked carefully, making sure to keep the wheat dry. They tied it in bundles and loaded it into a wagon. The little mouse decided to follow the wheat. Soon the wagon arrived at the mill. That's where they grinded up all the flour. It was getting grounded up. The little mouse poked around until he found a hole in the bottom of the door. He crept inside. Huge grinding wheels were crushing the wheat into fine flour, into pieces of flour. Flour is like, remember, we put that in Play-Doh. We put that in our challah that we made and our cookies at our hamantashen. The millers carefully poured the flour into sacks and loaded them onto a truck. Millers are people who work in the mill that grinds up the flour. The little mouse jumped aboard the truck and hid among the sacks, wondering where the truck would take them. They drove for a long time. They left the country with its open fields and came to the city. The little mouse peeked out. He saw tall buildings. He saw crowds of people and heard the noise of cars and trucks on the street. At last, the truck stopped in front of an old building. Workers came to unload the sacks of flour. Quickly and quietly, the little mouse jumped down and followed. An inspector stood at the door, checking to see that each flour sack was dry and tightly closed. That was his job. The little mouse was afraid he would be discovered, so he climbed up to a window ledge, squeezed through a crack, and hid behind the clock. There he is. He saw a large room with many people. They were all very busy. In one area, workers were unloading the sacks of flour. In another place, they were bringing buckets of water. In the middle was a man with a mixing bowl. When the mixing man called out, the flour man scooped up a cup of flour from the sack, reached through a little window, and dumped the flour into the bowl. When the mixing man called out again, the water man filled his pitcher with water, passed it through his window, and poured the water into the bowl. The mixing man worked very quickly, mixing the flour and water into a lump of dough. The little mouse watched. He wondered what was so special about this dough. The mixing man brought the dough to another area where many people stood at a long table. He gave a piece of dough to each person. They quickly rolled the dough into circles. The circles were passed to another table where a woman poked holes into them with a special tool. She lined up the circles on a rack near a brick oven. The baker slid the circles into the oven. Minutes later, they were crisp and brown. A delicious smell filled the room as he took them out of the oven and placed them on a rolling cart. All of a sudden, a bell rang. The people began to clean their work areas. They scrubbed the tables, sanded down the rolling pins, and washed and dried the bowls. When they were finished, the mixing man reset the clock and called out for more flour and water. The little mouse couldn't resist the delicious smell. He followed the cart into a room where people were packing the baked circles into boxes, tying them with string. People were standing in line to buy the boxes. He hopped onto the counter to take a peek. This is what it read: golden matzah. This matzah is made of wheat, which has been watched from the time of harvest through the time of baking. That's right, the little mouse thought and watched the matzah. I watched it from the time the wheat began to grow in the wheat field. I watched it being harvested. I watched it being ground into flour. I watched it being mixed into dough. I watched it being baked into matzah. The little mouse felt very important. He decided it was time to return to the country. Soon more wheat would be planted, and he wanted to be home in time to watch again. The end. I hope you like this story. I loved reading it to you. Until next time, bye-bye.